The major Abrahamic religions have billions of dedicated followers around the world, and despite their differences, they all have one particular thing in common: the Garden of Eden, also referred to as the Garden of God and the terrestrial paradise, is a sort of biblical earthly paradise created by God to be inhabited by Adam and Eve. Although it is considered a religious and spiritual notion, many in history and even in modern times have been convinced that it actually exists and its location can be traced. Recently, something mind-boggling was discovered in relation to this place that changes everything. The terrestrial paradise is described in Genesis 2:3 and Ezekiel 28 and 31. According to some claims, the name Eden originates from the Akkadian term Edinu and Sumerian term Edin, which means plain and steppe. It is also closely related to an Aramaic root word that translates to fruitful, well-watered. In another interpretation, the name Eden is associated with a Hebrew word used for pleasure. Therefore, the Vulgate reads Paradisum voluptatis in Genesis 2:8. In the Douay Rheims Bible, it is mentioned in the words, "And the Lord God had planted a paradise of pleasure." In biblical tradition, the garden is quite frequently alluded to by the biblical authors as an extravagant place full of the luxuries humans could imagine, and that is why it is called the Garden of God. It is said to be a paradise where everything is perfect, and the place was devoid of hunger, death, and disease. The book of Genesis describes the location of Eden as the source of 4 tributaries, and owing to this distinctive signature, various places have been considered for its possible location. These include the head of the Persian Gulf in southern Mesopotamia or modern Iraq, where the river Tigris and Euphrates run into the sea, Botswana, and Armenia. The actual location has long been a subject of dispute amongst scholars, but numerous amongst them have concluded that it could have been an extraterrestrial place where the gods once resided. The water from this sacred garden is believed to be the water source of Tigris and Euphrates rivers, both of which irrigated the land surrounding them, which is probably why many scholars have speculated that the Garden of Eden must be located in the vicinity of these 2 rivers. According to the Genesis flood narrative, the Genesis creation narrative, and the account of the Tower of Babel, the story of Eden echoes the ancient Mesopotamian myth of a king, a primordial man who was placed in the divine paradise to guard the tree of life. The Hebrew Bible narrates Adam and Eve walking around this garden naked due to their sinlessness. The same Garden of Eden has been mentioned in a few places in the Bible too, for instance, in Genesis, Isaiah 51:3, Ezekiel 37:35, and Joel 2:3. Others, including Zechariah 14 and Ezekiel 47, also paint a paradise-like picture without actually mentioning the word Eden. The second part of the Genesis narrative opens up with the Lord God creating the first man, Adam, whom he placed in a garden that he planted eastward in Eden. This man was free to eat from any tree in the garden except one, the tree bearing the knowledge of good and evil. The description from Genesis indicates that the water from this garden of God watered 4 crucial areas: Pishon, which flows into the land of Havilah; Gihon, which flows into the land of Cush; Tigris, which flows into the eastern side of Assyria; and finally, Euphrates. The description also says that the garden has every single tree that is pleasant to the sight and ideal for food. But 2 trees are singled out as they bear more significance than the others. The first one being the tree of life, and the other one is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The Genesis account isn't quite consistent, as Genesis 2:8-9, 3:1-3 state that both trees are present in the midst of the garden, but Genesis 3:22-24 gives the possibility that both these immensely important trees were planted on the eastern side of the Garden of Eden, where Adam was originally placed. There's also the fact that the account describing the garden in Genesis is not identical to the descriptions provided by other biblical texts. For instance, in Ezekiel 28, the luxuries found in the garden are not mentioned in Genesis 2:4b-3:24. Because of this and some other reasons, the Garden of God was considered a metaphor in the ancient Near East, where the gods supposedly resided. From the perspective of the narrator of Genesis, the Garden of Eden was imaginatively crafted into an etiological purpose and not as the divine residence of the first man and woman. According to Terje Stordalen, the Garden of Eden described in Ezekiel seems to be located in Lebanon. It seems that Lebanon is the alternative placement in the Phoenician myth of this garden. There are also some connections between paradise, the Garden of Eden, and the Forest of Lebanon within prophetic writings. In the opinion of Edward Lipinski and Peter Kyle McCarter, the oldest Sumerian analogue of the Garden of Eden, the Garden of the Gods, actually relates to a mountain sanctuary located in Lebanon and the anti-Lebanon ranges. There are as many speculations regarding the location of the Garden of Eden out there as there are scholars. Besides the head of the Persian Gulf in Mesopotamia, as argued by Juris Sarins, there's another theory that proposed that it could be hiding in the Armenian highlands or the Armenian plateau. David Roll, a British archaeologist, believes it could be located in Persia or modern-day Iran, in an area close to Tabriz, but scholarly sources haven't really picked up his suggestion. Certain religious groups also believe that the terrestrial paradise might be local to them outside of the Middle East. Some of the earliest Mormon leaders argued that the garden was located in Jackson County, Missouri. The 20th century Panacea Society thought it was located in their hometown of Bedford, England. A preacher named Eli E. Calloway suggested that this garden was on the Apalachicola River of Florida in the vicinity of a town called Bristol. Some accounts even suggest that it's located in Jerusalem. Believe it or not, but on his third voyage, even Christopher Columbus thought he had reached the earthly paradise when he first set eyes on the South American mainland. Briefly putting it, the Garden of Eden holds immense importance in human and religious history, and a good proportion of believers think it is an actual place, though most of them are still struggling to decide where it is. The location mentioned in the biblical text in association to the four rivers, the Euphrates, Tigris, Gihon, and Pison, seem most credible to scholars. But the problem is, for centuries now they have not succeeded in figuring out the exact location of Gihon and Pison. It's also important to consider that major geographical changes have occurred since biblical times, so it is even more difficult to determine that exact location. Another obstacle was that according to scriptures, no structures were constructed by Adam, so there are no landmarks. The author of Genesis has described it as a very specific location that was easy to notice because of its unique nature. But in recent years, a new theory about the location of the terrestrial paradise has emerged. This one is based on a discovery made in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Archaeologist Jody Magnus presented the theory. She was the one who saw a discovery in a church in Jerusalem that led her to conclude that she may have the answer to the million-dollar question. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is located in the Old City and is believed to be the site where Jesus of Nazareth was crucified and later resurrected in a place called Calvary or Golgotha. Magnus opines that this is also the place where Adam was buried. The place is apparently somewhere underneath the rock of Golgotha, a rocky outcrop where Jesus was crucified. In Jody's own words, below is the Chapel of Adam, and there is a tradition which goes way back in Christianity which connects this spot to Adam, the first man. When Jesus was crucified on top of the rock above us, his blood flowed down through a crack in the rock, and Adam, the first man, lay buried underneath. But when Jesus' blood flowed onto him, he was resurrected. Legend has it that Adam stayed most of his life in this very location of the Garden of Eden, so there might actually be some truth to this theory. Scholars have explained that in early Judaism and in the times of Jesus, the presence of God dwelled in the temple, and that's why Jerusalem was conceived as the Garden of Eden at that time. While Dr. Magnus wholeheartedly believes that the Garden of Eden is located in Jerusalem owing to its importance in the Abrahamic religions and all the biblical events that took place here, her theory contradicts the biblical description. Hence, many out there don't find it plausible. Back in 2019, there were some claims suggesting that the real Garden of Eden had been traced to the African nation of Botswana based on the results of a major DNA study. So scientists argue that our ancestors are located to the south of the Zambezi River in the northern part of Botswana. They reached this conclusion after analyzing the maternal genetic lineage of anatomically modern humans and found that it was actually closest to those living in the area comprising northern Botswana, Namibia to the west, and Zimbabwe to the east. For about 70,000 years, our ancestors thrived in the region before the climate drastically changed and turned what used to be the greatest lake of Africa, Lake Makati into what is now called the Kalahari Desert. This forced a mass exodus of population as people migrated elsewhere between 130,000 to 110,000 years ago. According to scientists, this also sparked the development of ethnic, genetic, and cultural diversity we see today in the world. There were three main groups, the first one to the northeast, the second one to the southwest, and the third one that remained put. The southwestern group thrived better than the northeastern one, particularly because they were able to adapt to marine foraging. The group that remained eventually got used to the scorching dry land, and their maternal descendants are still found in the region. This study was led by Professor Vanessa Hayes from the Garvan Institute of Medical Research and University of Sydney. She explained that the samples from the South African and Namibian volunteers helped the researchers compare the DNA code mitogenome, which according to her is like a time capsule of our ancestral mothers, accumulating changes slowly over generations. She also explained that it's been clear to them that the anatomically modern humans appeared in the African continent almost 200,000 years ago. What has been long debated is actually the exact location of this emergence and the subsequent dispersal of our earliest ancestors. Therefore, it could also be the divine terrestrial paradise we're all eager to locate. Back in the 19th century, a theory was developed that suggested an ancient continent, Lemuria, occupied what is now the Indian Ocean, and some scientists speculated that this continent may have been the cradle of the human race, therefore was also the infamous Garden of Eden. But that's not all. One of the extremely far-fetched theories about the location of Eden was put forth by Brinsley Lapoa in The Sky People. It argues that the biblical description of the river watering the garden and then giving off four heads isn't consistent with any of the rivers in nature. He wrote that only canals can be made to flow in this manner. He then suggests that Mars could be the actual location of the Garden of Eden, as such canals have been theorized to have existed on the Red Planet. This and several other claims have been made about the location of the divine terrestrial paradise, but it seems like humanity is still pretty far away from actually reaching the extravagant biblical garden.